Ellie here with WhoCulture, and we have 1 week. 1 week until the Star Beast. It's been so long since we've had proper episodes of Doctor Who. And the reason I say that is because obviously the reason I'm here to talk to you today is about the Children in Need sketch. So I can't really say it's been a long time since we've had any Doctor Who content because otherwise I wouldn't be sat here talking to you. So this sketch that we saw, it follows on from Liberation of the Daleks, which is the comic strip that's been playing out in Doctor Who magazine for the last year. And the last edition of that teased Skaro. And then we open up our skit here on Skaro. The 14th Doctor arrives during the creation of the Daleks, or as they are actually named here, the Mark III travel machines, because the word Dalek, the name Dalek, as we learn here, hasn't actually been created yet. They're still thinking of that name. I mean, straight off the bat, looking at this skit, the production value is very, very high. That shot of the TARDIS kind of spiraling towards Skaro, clearly there's a lot of money going into this. It's kind of hard to get used to this higher production value when you're so used to seeing the kind of jankiness of the lower budget years of Doctor Who. I mean, clearly, I know that CGI has progressed since then, but there's something about Doctor Who having that kind of feel to it that makes it so special. And as much as you obviously don't want it to look poorly made now, you don't want it to lose that kind of nostalgic element of being a little bit low budget and a little bit kind of paper mache. So in this skit, we are introduced to a pre-accident Davros, who is played once again here by Julian Bleach. Not, as The Independent reported, not played by Christopher Eccleston. How do you even make that mistake? But anyway, Julian Bleach back as Davros. This is brilliant. I love Julian Bleach in the role as Davros. His voice is so distinctive. And fun fact, it's gone a little story time. I saw Julian Bleach in a play, well actually a musical, 3 times. When I first started at university. 3 times I saw the same musical 3 times. It was called The Grinning Man. It was the first piece of theatre that I saw when I moved to Bristol for university. And it was this kind of macabre musical. It was brilliant. There was puppeting. It was absolutely incredible. But as soon as Julian Bleach walked on stage, I didn't know he was in it. And as soon as he walked on stage and started speaking, or actually probably singing, it instantly was like, that's Davros. That is Davros on the stage right now. And all my friends obviously were like, what? What are you talking about? And I was like, it's Davros! How can nobody... That's Davros! But anyway, I digress. Point being, I love Julian Bleach, he's brilliant, and, fun fact, he can sing. So it is interesting to see this kind of iteration of Davros in this skit here. And what some people might not know, which is very interesting, is that Russell T Davies actually had an initial plan back in Series 4 for Journey's End and The Stolen Earth to include a flashback scene of Davros's accident when Rose questions his appearance. It gives you kind of maybe an insight into Russell T Davies's mind that this idea was there in his brain, and so that could well have inspired this skit to explore this pre-accident iteration of Davros. Now I am going to talk a bit more about Davros and particularly the future of Davros in a second, because Russell T Davies did make some very interesting comments about the character, but I'll get to that after I've finished breaking down the skit itself. So Davros is showing his new invention to another car-led scientist, Mr. Castavillian, which I think is probably one of the best on-the-nose supervillain names that a character in a skit like this could have. I mean, Mr. Castavillian. It feels really Bond-like, but in a really cheesy and corny way, and I'm totally here for it. And he also shows off this really insane death claw that comes out of the Dalek. The claw! And then he gets called away out of the room, and just as he does, the Doctor crashes through in the TARDIS and completely rips the claw off of the Dalek. And then 14 emerges from the TARDIS. I had such strange feelings seeing David Tennant step out of that TARDIS. It kind of simultaneously felt slightly odd and at the same time entirely familiar. I mean, I've spoken so much on this channel about, in the build up to this, about the nostalgia of David Tennant returning, particularly for someone my age who grew up watching David Tennant as the Doctor. It felt kind of slightly odd in as much as, oh, it's David Tennant, but we haven't seen him in a while. But at the same time, it felt so natural and so right that it almost felt like all the years that had passed between him leaving and this moment, they just kind of blinked out of existence. And I'm not trying to erase Matt Smith or Peter Capaldi or Jodie Whittaker in any way. I loved watching all of those years in between, but it just, in that moment, it felt like no time had passed and it was just the next adventure and David Tennant had never left. It is also quite kind of full circle moment for David Tennant because he also played the Doctor for Children in Need back in 2005 when he was the new Doctor. And so it's kind of come full circle that once again he's returning as the new Doctor for Children in Need this year. So we learn in this skit that the Doctor inadvertently gives the name Dalek to Castellan. He also introduces the word exterminate, and we also learn that he is responsible for the toilet plunger arm of a Dalek, and Davros approves of that. Improvement? Is it an improvement? I mean, the Deathclaw looked pretty cool, but the plunger is so iconic. So my overall thoughts really about the skit. I'm mixed. I really enjoyed it. I loved seeing David Tennant back. The one thing I will say is that going into it, I was sort of under the impression that it was going to be a 5-minute serious scene, particularly because the way Russell T Davies spoke about it, I believe on Instagram, he said this is not a comedy sketch or skit. One of those words. And so when it started to kind of go in that direction, I was a little bit like, oh, I thought this was going to be a full-on scene. And it started off that way. The first part with Julian Bleach with his super villainness and that was really great. And then obviously it kind of started to take a bit more of a comedic turn with the exploration of different acronyms for the name of this device. Which is not to say that I didn't enjoy it. I absolutely did. And I think there's something to be said for watching it a second time once you know what to expect. Because I think going into it, I had high expectations for it to be a very serious scene that might all kind of set us up ready for next week. And I feel like that's kind of how it had been promoted. But if you watch it again, going in knowing full well that it's not that serious and that you can take it a little bit more lightly, then it's actually really enjoyable once you know what to expect and you haven't put it on this pedestal that it needs to meet all these expectations and you know what you're getting into. In general, I went in expecting it to be more serious than it actually turned out to be. But having said that, I really did actually enjoy it and it's pumped me for next week. I'm very excited. The only other thing that I would say is that, on the other hand, Children in Need has a lot of eyeballs on it, and this could have been the perfect opportunity for them to put their strongest foot forward and put this proper serious scene and give people a real taste of what's coming. Some people might watch Children in Need that didn't plan on watching Doctor Who, and if you put a really serious, high stakes, great scene there, you might actually gain yourself some more viewers who may not have tuned in next week. So there were two main takeaways from this scene. The first, which is probably the main one, was actually revealed in the episode of Unleashed that followed that skit, so I'll get back to that in a second. But the second thing is that we learn that the Doctor is responsible for all of those iconic elements of the Daleks. You know, the name Dalek, the word exterminate, the toilet plunger. Let's just look at it as what it is. It's a 5-minute skit for Children in Need, and let's not go too far as to go, well, what does this mean for the future of the show? Because quite honestly, does this count in Doctor Who lore? Is it part of canon, or is it just a little bit of fun? And I think it probably is the latter. It's just a little bit of fun and we don't need to take it too seriously. And by not taking it too seriously, we can have a good laugh at the fact that Davros prefers a toilet plunger over a Deathclaw. That's really, I think, all there is to it. I think the nature of these is you need to go into them not taking it too seriously, and then they can be very much more enjoyable. They're not aimed to be part of the main show itself and part of that more high-stakes situation. So the second takeaway, or the first takeaway, because I said that that one was the second, I've just confused myself. But the other thing that we took away from this skit, it revolves around Davros, but it was actually what was revealed in the episode of Unleashed afterwards. For those of you who don't know, Unleashed is basically the new Doctor Who Confidential. It's kind of a behind-the-scenes look that will be following every new episode of Doctor Who on BBC Three and BBC iPlayer. Unfortunately, it will not be available elsewhere, so it is at the moment a UK exclusive thing, but that's okay because I'm going to tell you what they said. Stefan Powell is very, very Welsh. You're welcome for that awful accent. Actually, it's the only accent I can do. Okay, but moving on to what I actually wanted to talk about, and that is Russell T Davies talking about why he chose to present Davros in the way that he did, in a pre-accident form, and perhaps a little bit about the future and the history of the character. Now, I am going to stress right now, I'm going to read a quote of what he said in this episode of Unleashed. This is not the full quote. It's a very, very long quote for me to have to read. He spoke about it in great detail for quite some time, so I'm not reading the whole thing. I would encourage you to find a video of this actual discussion so you can get the full context of what he was discussing here. So I'm only reading a small fraction of what he said here, but this is what he said in relation to his choices surrounding Davros and Davros going forward. We had long conversations about bringing Davros back because he's a fantastic character. Time and society and culture and taste has moved on, and there's a problem with the Davros of old in that he's a wheelchair user who is evil. And I have problems with that, and a lot of us on the production team had problems with that, of associating disability with evil. I say this is how we see Davros now. This is what he looks like. Davros used to look like that, and he looks like this now. So here's the thing about this idea of Davros having a new appearance. I think it is perfectly fine to be perhaps disappointed with the change, whilst also completely understanding and agreeing with the fact that times have changed and that representation has changed, and we're very much more aware of the way that things are presented now. I think personally, and I think maybe this is an ignorant point of view to have, because as an able-bodied person, it wasn't something that had necessarily crossed my mind. And I think perhaps that is maybe an ignorant point of view to have as someone who hasn't had to deal with a lack of representation or a stereotypical representation of who I am as a person. So I completely understand and completely praise Russell T Davies for moving forward and for saying that we are going to change this in order to right a wrong of the past. I also can completely sympathise with the people who now are questioning, well, you've just changed. Are you suggesting now that you're going to change the entire history of a show? And I guess equally people weren't happy when something like The Timeless Child was introduced, and that essentially rewrote the history of the show. And so I think what really matters now is how we move forward with this and what direction Russell T Davies decides to take this new exploration of the character of Davros. It's also worth noting as well that everybody grumbles with changes in Doctor Who. Even when there's a new Doctor, which you know is coming, there's always grumbles when things change, but most of the time people get over it. You know, people don't like change. That's the nature of humanity. Change unsettles us, but we'll get over it. I think what's unclear at the moment, and as I've just said, what really matters is moving forward, is where Russell T Davies decides to go with the character. Are we now only going to see Davros pre-accident, in stories that are pre-accident? In which case, I think that's absolutely fine. We're seeing a part of Davros's life that we have not seen before. It doesn't undo what's been done before, and I think that'd be very interesting. I'd like to explore more of kind of an earlier iteration of Davros and what motivates him, and to see that kind of evilness of him just as a supervillain before any external elements maybe accelerated his viewpoints or anything like that. We could see a retcon of everything that's happened since, but I don't think that will be the case. And the other thing is as well, is we could have an exploration of a way in which Davros healed himself. You know, a very simple fix for that could be, you know, a little bit of remaining regeneration energy that the 12th Doctor gave him. You know, that could be a very simple fix if that was the direction that they wanted to go in. But I think there's three possibilities here. We have a retcon of the history of Davros. We only see pre-accident Davros from here on out, or we get an explanation as to how Davros has managed to heal himself in some way. And that just about sums up our takeaways and our breakdown of that skit for Children in Need. But for more 14th Doctor news then, why not check out our video about this very interesting tease that RTD just dropped about the 60th specials. And in the meantime, I've been Ellie with WhoCulture, and in the words of River Song herself, goodbye, sweeties.